Hello, 310 Tribe. I am here with you, pre-recording this on Sunday, January the 8th, 2023. I am doing this, I'm going to try and do this for all of my articles going forward because I know many of you enjoy listening to this as opposed to sitting down and reading it. You know, if you're listening to it, you could be driving or working out or doing stuff around the house, whatever it is that you do. So I'm going to try and always, have each of my articles going forward, have this video presentation accompany it. If I don't, for whatever reason, just realize that I am uh, physically unable to do it. But this is going to try, I'm going to try and make this to be the standard going forward. So this is the article. I've called it The Tyranny of the Present. I'll begin. For my more seasoned readers, let's say you could travel back in time and revisit a moment in your life. You're not going back to change the past, but simply to sit as a silent guest and listen in on a conversation you might have had back then. Let's say you decide to go back to the year 1993 when you and a friend are in a restaurant having lunch. At some point in the conversation, it steers into the signs of the times and when you both think the Lord will return. Your friend might mention the fact that the year 1993 is exactly 7 years from the end of the millennium, which means the rapture is near. One of you might add in Hosea 6:2 for good measure to seemingly shore up this idea that there is some significance to the coming year 2000. And you overhear yourself confidently mention the fact that the nation Israel is the super sign, and it's been 44 years since Israel became a nation again. You discuss the merits of a 40-year generation, but it seems since the 1948 didn't pan out in 1988, perhaps the time might in fact start from the unification of Jerusalem in 1967. However, the idea of waiting until 2007 seems very unpalatable and too far off into the future to be taken seriously. Now, the conversation turns back to the signs of the times. The discussion turns to the recent and unexpected presidential election of a relatively unknown Democrat governor named Bill Clinton. And while you don't really see American Bible prophecy, you are not really sure how she disappears apart from the rapture because the economy is still strong, the nation is still largely self identifies as a Christian nation, and America still seems like America. You might mention the recent Gulf War in Kuwait as a fulfillment of wars and rumors of war, and how Saddam Hussein could easily fill out the role of the coming Antichrist. You might even mention the increasing use of credit cards to make purchases and the potential for the UPC barcodes to be the fulfillment of the mark of the beast. However, as you begin to take or to go over the science in more depth, you and your friend realize that there are still so many things that don't make sense, so many unanswered questions. There are things that you aren't quite sure about because you can't see how they come about. Things like how this relatively new thing called the internet will play into the Antichrist coming kingdom. Things like how the barcode gets on your forehead or your hand, and how that controls all buying and selling around the world when cash is still king. Things like how the collapse of the evil empire, in parentheses, the Soviet Union, just left a messy and uncertain future for Mother Russia. You still can't see how Iran, Turkey, and Russia come to form some monstrous mega coalition when Turkey and Israel are allies, and Russia is now experimenting with capitalism and democracy. You don't even mention Iran because you both know that nation is still recovering after a devastating 8 year war with Iraq. Furthermore, you don't know which of the 11 nations in the European Union will drop out to make it an even 10 nation confederacy. And as fascinating as this conversation has become, you both come to the conclusion that there's still too many unknown variables for it to make sense. You both admit that while we're in the last days, in the Hebrew 1:1 sense of the word, and if that is true, then the end didn't quite seem as bad as you thought it would. The picture was there, but there are still too many unanswered questions. And as you get up to pay the bill, the one definitive conclusion you both arrive at is that while the end is near, neither of you could see it going much further than the year 2000. You certainly couldn't see it going further than the year 2008, which seemed so far into the future back then, it was bordering on science fiction territory. Does this conversation sound familiar to anyone? I'm using 1993 as a random number. or a random date, but we could go back 10, 15, 20 years or even further and see that much of what is happening now was still a mystery then. It was a mystery because we were limited to the information available to us at the time. Now ask yourself these questions in the present time. Can we see our nation and world going on in the status quo for another 15 years into our future? Are the signs of the times still foggy and vague? Or are they becoming increasingly clear? While it is true that we also can't see into the future, much of what is laid out in the Bible is manifesting itself into a series of possible and highly realistic scenarios. Are we struggling with things like the Gog Magog alliance, the mark of the beast technology, the one world government, a one world currency, a one world religion, the destruction of Damascus, the postmodern and post Christian America, the demise of the U.S. apart from the rapture, the Psalm 90:10 application to Israel? I think these things are becoming increasingly clear. In fact, they are becoming crystal clear. Assessment. But you, O Daniel, but you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end, and many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Daniel 12:4. I think one of the more underrated signs is the explosion of prophetic understanding regarding what is coming upon the world in these last days. I mean, it's becoming so obvious now that even non Christians are starting to see it. Think about it this way: what is becoming increasingly obvious to even the most casual of laypersons who study a little bit of prophecy is something that the greatest eschatological minds of the past 2,000 years struggled mightily with understanding. Here's something else to take into consideration. The four horsemen of the apocalypse are the first four seal judgments that the Lord Jesus Christ unleashes upon the earth. He does this because nobody else in the universe can do it, and he is the only one who is worthy to take the scroll from the Father's hand and then open them. But consider this: we are starting to see the horseman's shadow form in our own day. We are starting to hear the hoofbeats of the riders in our day. What this means is Satan is trying to get ahead of Jesus' opening of the seals and preemptively break prophecy by making these things happen before Jesus is ready to execute them. Obviously, we know this can't happen until after the rapture of the church because the rapture is what sets the stage for these things to come about. Remember the boundaries in Luke 17:26 through 30, that things are normal until the rapture, and then sudden destruction and judgment happens, not the other way around. The days of Noah and Lot certainly can't apply to the time inside the 70th week. So, what do the horsemen represent again? Well, the white horse, with the rider on the white horse, represents a regional and global government. It is the establishment of the Antichrist kingdom on the earth. It has the popularization of globalist and regional systems, and we are seeing these in our own day. We've got the BRICS nations, AUKUS, Agenda 2030, the Great Reset, Fourth Industrial Revolution, World Economic Forum, that is creating the framework for the 10 kings to arise, and ultimately out of them, the Antichrist. We have the rider on the red horse. Peace is taken from the earth. Currently, there are 30 active conflicts in the world today, with violence soaring through crime in almost every nation, that will give the governments the justification to increasingly fast track weapons technologies and artificial intelligence, as well as surveillance. The rider on the black horse represents economic ruin and collapse. At present, 87% of the nations in the world are struggling with inflation, with energy and food shortages, and staggering national debts that will be the justification for the first ever regional central bank digital currencies. And then we know ultimately that these will be gathered into a global universal central bank digital currency. The rider on the pale horse represents global pestilence and death. We've seen over the past century, the rise of countless epidemics and pandemics. But more importantly, we've seen the government's willingness to exploit these through management by crisis, and even go so far to release some of these through staged accidental releases or they escape from the laboratories. This will be the first. This is done first to condition the global population to accept these mandatory uh, safety measures, and I got air quotes here, and then justify the implementation of biotechnology into the skin. So if we're starting to see these world leaders who are influenced by dark spiritual forces driving their human puppets to meet a 2030 deadline, it means our enemy is privy to information most are somehow not seeing, most likely because of its proximity to the 2000th anniversary of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Let us not forget that they, the demonic hordes led by Satan, were there when Christ was crucified and rose from the dead victorious. That event, above any other, is painfully and permanently etched into their memories, and they are extremely sensitive to its significance, far more than humans are. We must also recognize that God still has a say in all this. As is always the case, he loves to throw monkey wrenches into the enemy's best laid plans. Conclusion. In order to not be blinded by the present, let us look back at Christ's first coming to see if there is any correlation between then and the soon rapture of the church. We say rapture because this is the true wild card or black swan event that Satan can't know, nor anyone else can know for that fact. However, if the rapture isn't directly connected, although the rapture isn't directly connected to the official start of the 70th week of Daniel, i.e., the 7-year tribulation, it does set the stage for all of the highly chronicled and subsequent events to follow. We know according to the Old Testament that the coming of the promised Messiah would have had to occur between two specific events. One, the passing of Israel's ability to fully govern itself, as found in Genesis 49:10, and two, the destruction of the second temple, as found in Daniel 9:26. Not only were these prophetic texts given centuries in advance, but they were accompanied by prophetic proofs that would verify its soon fulfillment. It's found in John 18:31, Luke 19:41 through 44, various rabbinical texts, and the writings of Josephus in his Antiquities, Book 20, verse 9, or passage 9. Dr. Mark Eastman does an amazing job articulating these points in his chapter, The Time of Messiah's Coming, from his book, The Search for Messiah. Below is a summary. And quote, in our examination of messianic prophecy and ancient rabbinical interpretations, we have seen a number of indicators which pinpointed the time of Messiah's coming. According to the ancient Jewish scholars, the Savior was to come, A, during the time when the membership in the tribe of Judah could be confidently traced, as discussed in Genesis 49:10. B, previous to the demolition of the second temple, Daniel 9:24 through 27. C, before the scepter had departed from Judah, again Genesis 49:10. And D, at the beginning of the fifth millennium after creation, as found in the Babylonian Talmud, Sanhedrin 96 through 99. Remarkably, after 70 AD, none of these criteria would ever exist again. However, when Jesus was growing up in Nazareth, the scepter had not passed from Judah, the second temple was still standing, and the fifth millennium after creation was at hand. Messiah had come, the scepter was removed, and then the second temple was later destroyed, just as Daniel had predicted. End quote. Thus, the window for Christ's first coming was roughly 64 years, if we're using the 6 to 7 AD time frame up to 70 AD when the Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed. This begs the question as to whether there will be an equal or similar window of time for Christ's rapture for his church. And if so, can we know it? So if we are measuring when Israel regained her national authority, starting in 1948 or even 1949, which would make it 75 to 76 years respectively, or if we go from her reunified or the reunification of her capital, Jerusalem, in 1967, that would be 56 years. Is one of those things, either if we use either of those dates in those corresponding time frames, is one of those things we'll have to wait and see. Since we know no man knows the day or the hour, we aren't going to know specifically when the rapture happens, but that doesn't mean we can't know anything about his two-stage return, speaking to the rapture and then the second coming, in order to establish his kingdom upon the earth when he rules from the throne of David, as found in 2 Samuel 7:16, Luke 1:31 through 33, Revelation 11:15, and Zechariah 14:9. So here are some thoughts on the subject. One, Jesus explicitly stated that he would come back. This means we can implicitly trust him on this, as found in John 14, 1 through 3, Matthew 26, 64, and Revelation 1, 7, Luke 12, 36, and Philippians 3, 21 through 22. Number two, he implied that his return would be after a long time. And 2,000 years so far has been a pretty long time. That's found in Luke 18:8, when he asked the question, when the Son of Man returns, will he find faith on the earth? It's found in Matthew 25:19 in the parable of the talents, Luke 29, chapter 20, verse 9, the parable of the wicked vine dressers, Matthew 24:14 and 28:19, which states that the gospel will go to the ends of the earth, which certainly implies a great deal of time. And then Matthew 24:48, the parable of the faithful and the evil servant. We won't know specifically, but the Bible states that we should recognize the season through convergence. Matthew 24:33, when you see all these things. 1 Thessalonians 5, 1 through 9, the rapture is imminent, but if watching, we will know the season. Hebrews 10:25, we will see that day approaching. Revelation 3:3, here the church of Sardis is commanded to watch, or else Christ will come upon them like a thief. The question is, the universal question then is, or the primary question then is, watch for what? What are they watching for? And I would refer back to Matthew 24:33, when you see all these things. Thus, Matthew 24:33 speaks to the convergence of all the signs that Christ gave in the Olivet Discourse, the wars, the rumors of war, pestilence, earthquakes, the false prophets and the false messiahs, deception, the loss of people's hearts waxing cold, and the increased persecution of believers. All of these are signs, and they've been present throughout history, but they've never been present all at the same time and with the frequency and the intensity that we've seen recently here in the last 100 years. So my theory on this is, just as it would have been possible, and I say possible, not popular, to see the end extending forward 30 years into the future from 1933, it would be equally impossible to apply that same 30-year standard from 2023 to 2053. Let me read that again. Just as it would have been possible, and not popular, but possible, to see the end extending forward 30 years into the future from 1993, it would be equally impossible to apply that same 30-year standard from 2023 and then going forward to 30 years to the year 2053. In other words, if I was in 1993, it wouldn't have been popular to say that we would still be here after 30 years. So it would have been possible. And that idea certainly wasn't, it wasn't popular, but, people couldn't really deny the fact that was a possibility. The reason it was possible in 1993 and not possible now is simply due to the reality of how far we've come and how fast the world is pressing forward into the framework for the first seal judgments, or i.e. the four horsemen. Furthermore, technological advances are happening so quickly that they threaten to outpace the technological capabilities listed in the book of Revelation. And while it's hard to understand why Satan would want to press the fast forward button ultimately, or on what will ultimately be his demise, perhaps he's doing it in an attempt to break prophecy by achieving those prophesied ends, i.e. the beast kingdom, before Christ's preordained timeline is established. In other words, he's attempting to force God's hand ahead of the coming official 2000th anniversary, which would be 2033. Now, and that's a big if that is the standard by which God is using. But just like our 1993 selves, we too are limited by what we can know and see in our own day. This is why Bible prophecy is crucial to our understanding of the whole counsel of God. God gives us a sneak peek by way of an outline to know what is coming upon the earth and in what order. Albeit we can't know and see albeit what we can know and see is head and shoulders above what we could understand back then, go back 10, 15, 20, 30 years. We know far more now than they did. Nevertheless, we are still limited to our present because none of us can see into the future. However, given the speed and pace at which Bible prophecy is being fulfilled, it should be an indicator of the nearness of his return. In closing, quoting Luke 21:28. Now, when these things begin to happen, look up, lift up your heads because your redemption draws near. Now, that was just some ideas and things I was thinking through. And I really want to hone in on this idea that what was possible back in 1993, in 1993, I think the point I was trying to make is that we knew things about Bible prophecy, but there were still so many unanswered questions. In the if you had like a scale, and on one side of the scale you had things we couldn't understand, and then on the other side of the scale we had things we could understand. Obviously, the side that we don't understand is going to outweigh the stuff we could understand. And I think today it's reversed. I think things are coming into clear view that that we struggled with 10 years ago, that we struggled with 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and so on. Um, Certainly things like a digital currency. Bitcoin didn't really come on the scene until I want to say 2004 or 2005, cryptocurrency. And before that, you know, cash was still the predominant form of payment for most transactions. Obviously, for big transactions, people had progressed into credit cards by then. But back in 1993, you know, you had store cards, like Montgomery Ward's, J.C. Penney's, Walmart, or whatever. Uh, you might have had, if you were a businessman, you might have had an American Express card or something. If you did a lot of traveling, you might have had some kind of a card for an airline or something. But for the most part, most people paid with cash or they paid with checks. When I was in the Army, when I first got stationed in Germany back in 1994, I still had to stand in line to collect a paper paycheck. Um, and I know there's, the jobs I held all through high school, they were paper paychecks. I had to take those checks and I had to go to the bank when the bank was open and deposit them and then pull out so much money that I needed and so on and so forth. So, for the most part, cash was king. People did use checks to write things, but for the most part, people used cash. And it was hard to look forward into time and come to a time or to visualize a time when nobody used cash, that they used some kind of a mark on their hands or on their forehead. We had cartoons, and like if you look back at the old Chick tracks and stuff that had the people with the 666 on their forehead and stuff, we could think about things like that, but we couldn't think about how that practically or how that was put into practical use, other than, if you walked into a store, you see it on somebody's forehead that you let them in. But how does that correspond to pain? And how does the logistics of it work? We didn't understand it. If we looked at a one world government, it was difficult to visualize one person controlling everything, especially when uh, a lot of the nations and everything was so completely separated. Prior to 1991, the Soviet Union was still intact. Prior to '89, the Iron Curtain was still up, dividing Europe. I mean, you had these two opposing world empires that were just didn't want any, did not want to get along, and that had been the case going back to World War II. So it was very difficult to see how the entire world could be brought up under one system. And I think what was interesting and what we mentioned, or one of the people I ate with today at lunch mentioned the statement by George Bush at his speech. I think it was in 91 or 92, where he talked about a new world order. I think it was right after the Gulf War. And certainly that language uh, triggered people that were uh, understanding of not only Bible prophecy but of more conspiratorial matters. With there wasn't a whole lot of folks back then, but there were still certain people that were keyed in on that. And so when he said that, when George H.W. Bush said that, alarm bells went off in people's heads and think, oh man, he's talking about a new world order. And certainly George H.W. Bush was not necessarily a good man. I mean, he spent years and decades with the CIA. He was very much part of the deep state. But that language and that vision that he had was something that his son would later emulate when he became president. So uh, they came out. He makes a statement. He uses that phrase, "the New World Order." Uh, the few people that were watching things, alarm bells go ringing off in their heads, and then it kind of just fades off into memory because life goes on. People get busy, they start having kids, they're working. Um, the economy's booming. Your favorite sports team's winning. Big events are happening around the world. The World Trade Center in '93, the Somalia, our U.S. involvement in Somalia in 90, I want to say 93, 94, our involvement in Kosovo and in Serbia in 1995. Things are just going. Life is happening. And this statement that George H.W. Bush makes back in 91, 92 largely gets forgotten. And we're still not any closer to understanding how this new world order is going to come about. But then you fast forward into to a few years, and then 9/11 happens, and then the Patriot Act, and then these deployments of the coalition of the willing go into Iraq and Afghanistan. And then it just seems like things just went on overdrive at that point. Technology starting to rapidly advance. We had Bitcoin that came out, or excuse me, cryptocurrencies, and then you had smartphones came out, and then just wearable devices, and it's just been on overdrive ever since. So um, when these things begin to happen, they happen very quickly, and it's like a domino effect, or one little thing happens and it starts to avalanche everything else, and it just picks up speed and picks up momentum, and pretty soon we're just like drowning in information right now. Um, you look back at the old. I was trying to go back and find old prophecy articles from back in the early '90s, and certainly people could write about articles and topics, but it wasn't. You were looking like maybe one event a month or something, or unless you were talking about like social events or talking purely about Bible things. Um, you know, from a theoretical sense, you could talk about the rapture of the church, or you could talk about the Gog Magog war in Ezekiel 38, 39. But it was hard to visualize and put into effect, or into a perspective that makes sense. Gog Magog, when the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia is, just a hot mess. Turkey and Israel were friends. Um, Iran was still, struggling and recovering after their huge conflict with Iraq. All of those things would not have made any sense in the early 1990s. But now, today in 2023, you've got, Russia building up Iran's nuclear technologies. You've got Iran providing Russia with these drones to use in these suicide drones to use in Ukraine. You've got Turkey, who's become increasingly hostile to Israel and has partnered with both Iran and Russia in the recent years. And it looks like they're going to be driven into this coalition through this a series of things, and perhaps through the conflict going on in Syria. So we see the ties now where we couldn't see it in 1993. We can see easily how a digital currency could come about now. We know that all these nations around the world are racing to create these central bank digital currencies. and eventually they will, and they'll get implemented because cash, the whole fiat cash system is going to be nosedived because of the staggering national debts. And eventually, those national central bank digital currencies will be rolled up into a regional central bank digital currency. And eventually, we know by the midpoint of the tribulation, that's going to be rolled up into a singular or completely global, universal central bank digital currency, or some kind of digital currency that the beast system uses. And then eventually, from that, or even prior to that, that central bank digital currency will be tied in with some kind of technology that we either put in the hand or the forehead. And we have the technology now. We understand how that can work now. I mean, they're already doing it in a lot of places. I mean, there's places in Europe right now where you have a chip in your hand, or some kind of a device you're wearing, and you walk into a store, a grocery store. You just pick the things you need and you walk out, and it automatically debits everything from your account. You don't even pay anybody. You don't go through a cashier or anything. It's just automatically taken out. Each product has a code on it, and that code is moving with you out of the store. And as it moves out the door, out that barrier, it is connected to your account, and you were charged for those products. And that's just the beginning. I mean, it's just going to move in that direction. We see it happening. So the mark of the beast technology really isn't a mystery anymore as to how that could come about. So that's just a little additional commentary to the article, but I hope you enjoyed it. I I I pray that we aren't blinded to the tyranny of the present, and what I mean by that is just not being limited to what we can see around us. I don't think we are that much anymore. I think we were very much so 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. We were limited to what we could understand, and now that blindness is being removed because prophecy is coming to fulfillment. So I just want to say thanks for listening. I want to also say thank you to everybody for praying for my dad. He did pass today at 12:30. Um, he is a believer, so I know that we'll see him again. I'll see him again, and I am sad to see him go, but I'm also glad that he's not suffering anymore. I mean, he was in a tremendous amount of pain and suffering for the last few years. So I know he's finally getting the rest that he deserves. So thank you all, and I'll see you again soon.